Thank you, Professor Sun. So today, I think in the time, in the time I'm given as for my presentation here, I would like to share with you actually a project I'm just completing, a new book, partly based on a class, an upper division class I've been teaching for the past few years, basically about globalization. So in this project, which will, the book will be coming out this month, I developed a concept I call it re-globalization. A subtitle with that is When China Meets the World Again. So I begin with a little anecdote, which is in January last year. The China Ocean Shipping Group company and China Shipping Group company, actually they merged as one company named China COSCO Shipping Group. And this new company actually has over 1,000, actually 1,114 ships and 85 million tons of transport capacity, and making China COSCO Shipping Group actually the world's largest shipping company. And I think this huge transport capacity of COSCO is an epitome of China's rising economy and its huge impact on globalization. And if we take a historical aspect, I actually look at China's engagement in action with the global order. We can trace back to 100 years ago. Of course, we all know this concept of century of humiliation, begin with the Opium War of 1840. At that time, China actually was forced to enter the modern international system. And then, of course, came the Cold War. And I think Cold War, in a sense, can be conceptualized as what I call a dramatic representation of the restructuring of the global order. And very interestingly, the Kissingerian, so I call this term, Kissinger type of realist, when they look at the relationship between China and the world, they actually regard the Cold War period as a sort of return of China as a revolutionary state, a revisionist state, sort of become a status quo power and return back to the existing order. But I think this kind of Kissingerian view actually has its limit, and the reason being that, of course, the two being that they actually did not give, I think, the sufficient amount of attention to the proactive effect China actually brings to bear on the changes in global order. And we oftentimes talk about the several important turning point, 1978, when China started reform and opening up, and then again to the year 2000, China entered into the WTO formally. But now, I think we are actually coming at a very critical moment, not only in China, but also in terms of China's relation with the world or the future of the global order. So when China is returning to, I think it's fair to say that China now is returning to the global power center. The center is taking the center stage. So how will this reshape the existing global order? So I think this is another sort of contact of my research is this heated debate in recent years regarding globalization. So I think there are nowadays in the media, international media, and the pundits, politicians, experts, a lot of very pessimistic talk about globalization. A lot of people declare that globalization is dead. We are now entering into an age of so-called deglobalization, characterized by chaos and uncertainties. So events like Brexit, the rise of populism, ultra-nationalism, anti-immigrants, trade protectionism, etc. So for those pessimists, we are now witnessing the fragmentation of the world, and also the return of geopolitics. So we are advised to better, buckle up for the return of a very dark age, or simply the warning that now the world is on fire. So this, I think, very typical sort of lines we see nowadays regarding the prospect of globalization, where it is going. So, and of course, there are, to be fair, I think a lot of deficiencies in what we can call the old version of globalization. For instance, trade protectionism in recent years. And the data shows that there's a 50% increase in the number of trade protectionism policy in 2015 compared to 2014. And the United States actually implemented the most trade protection measures, which is 90 cases, according to the data compiled by Global Trade Alert. So trade protectionism is seriously hurting international free trade and globalization. Of course, needless to say, I think President Donald Trump truly represents the spirit of trade protectionism. And of course, another very big challenge, problems we're facing in this old sort of process version of globalization is the return of geopolitics, the rise of ISIS, the terrorist threat, and of course, the still ongoing the crisis over Crimea and Ukraine, the tension between Russia and Europe and the United States by and large, and of course, with President Trump's upcoming visit to East Asia, North Korea nuclear challenge looms large, and the America's rebalance to Asia, of course, now declared dead by the Trump administration. It also bring, in a sense, added a bit of tension to the region. So the question is that, is there, are we witnessing a disorder, but will a new order emerge out of that disorder, or we are simply, as the pessimists argue, that entering into a very dark age? And third, the voices of deglobalization actually surges, and partly because of this uneven distribution of wealth in this old version of a globalization process, it leads to widening gap between rich and poor, not only in developing countries, but nowadays increasingly in many Western developed countries, first and foremost United States, and therefore we witness a rise of populist anger and nationalism, and it is so clear that Trump actually he rode on those sentiment and won the election, and to the surprise of I think most of us, many of us around the world. So that was a contact. That is a contact of my research. But my main argument is that globalization is not that. Instead, it enters into a new phase, which can be labeled as re-globalization. So as China is now a second largest economy and the largest trading country, the largest contributor to global economic growth, China has increasingly become a leader in this re-globalization process, which is, of course, most symbolic when Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a keynote speech at the World Economic Forum at Davos, January this year, where he actually firmly defended economic globalization. So now I move to provide a definition of re-globalization. I define re-globalization as a process of remaking rules and restructuring globalization in which different actors are working together to rebuild the dynamics of globalization. In a sense, it is an upgrading and expansion of the old operating system, just like a computer. We're upgrading it and expand the capacity of the operating system. So there are a couple of features of re-globalization. Number one, it is no longer or at least the aim, is to no longer turning a zero-sum game into a winner-takes-all game into sort of, we doing this, engaging in this, promoting this regularization, engaging in this regularization process all together, and mutually molding and sharing rules. I think this is actually also part of the kind of principles, not only China, but also BRICS, G2, G20 countries together we're promoting. And secondly, like I mentioned, it's very much like upgrading and expansion of the old operating system. And certainly, this is not something. The reason I'm not using new. A lot of people actually talking about a new type of globalization. I think it is right in a sense, but I think it's more accurate to use the reasons that because China does not seek to overthrow the existing system or order and create something new. And there's a term in Chinese, it's called 另起炉灶, literally translated as to set up a separate kitchen, create new menus, new dishes according to our preferences, and basically, throw out another table, the old table, which is what the existing, order people are talking about. Rather, I think China and quite a number of like-minded, I think, emerging economies actually wanted to reform and upgrade the existing international system. That is the reason why I'm not using new, but rather as using like read. And fourthly, lastly, I think regularization is also can be characterized as an inclusive and sharing and a consultative and balanced process. And when we look at this relationship with China and regularization, I think the year 2008, I'm sure that many years later, when we look back, the year 2008 might become a turning point in the history of 21st century. And of course, there's global financial crisis, and also in a symbolic and psychological manner, China hosts of 2008 Olympic Games also sort of symbolize that the turning point. And of course, as United States, the hegemon, mired in the global financial crisis, and China increasingly, look at sort of eyeing what I call eyeing the crippled hegemon, and start thinking, and the policy scholarly community here in China start debating the America's decline, and this so-called this old strategy of so-called 韬光养晦, keeping low profile, once advocated by, instructed by the former paramount leader Deng Xiaoping. Now many people believe that has formally comes to an end. So since 2008, China has increasingly become a very active, and one would argue, one of the leading forces in regularization. So now China becomes a new engine for regularization. A number of very quick data clearly indicate that. So according to IMF, the year 2016, Chinese economy has contributed to over 30% of Africa's economic growth, 50% of Asia's economic growth, and 33% of overall global economic growth. And in 2015, China's outbound investment for the first time actually overtook its inbound investment. And now China has the second largest volume of outbound investment, next only to the United States. And in 2014, for the first time in history, more than 100 million of Chinese citizens actually travel abroad. And in 2016, last year, 135 million of Chinese citizens actually traveled abroad, which accounts for more than 1/10 of total international travelers. So 1 out of every 10, more than 1 out of every 10 travelers, international travelers, are actually Chinese citizens. which is almost twice of that of the United States, and also meaning that virtually the entire population of Japan traveled abroad last year. And together, the Chinese overseas travelers spent altogether $261 billion US, an increase actually by 12% compared to 2015. So this growth truly consolidated China's position as the #1 source market for tourists in the world since 2012. I think this is also very symbolic, really signify China's emergence as the new engine of this reglobalization process. Now, in the remaining time, I would like to look at quickly a couple of the specific cases where how this emerging global landscape of reglobalization is actually taking shape. So first case I'm going to look at, of course, is the Asian AIIB. And Asian economy accounts for 1/3 of global economy, and with 1/6 of global population, Asia, of course, remains the most dynamic region in the world. However, Asia's potential for growth is severely hindered by backward infrastructure and the insufficiency in the existing financial institution. And there's the number shows that there's a $8 trillion US in need, but only 800 billion US and 800 billion US annually in need for infrastructure development in Asia. But the existing financial institutions like Asia Development Bank and World Bank can only provide $20 billion US of investment in infrastructure in Asia annually. So, of course, it's a huge gap. In October 2016, China proposed to build an Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank to increase interconnectivity and economic integration in the region. So far, 57 countries have signed up as founding members of AIIB, which they include 4 out of 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, 15 out of the 20 G20 countries, and 5 out of the G7 countries, actually, and all of BRICS have joined. And AIIB is another major strategic initiative China has taken in reglobalization. It is a very successful attempt that China tries to reform and upgrade the current global financial system. And by January this year, AIIB has 70 members. It is estimated that AIIB will have 85 to 90 members by next year. So AIIB has now, currently, AIIB has more members than European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and ADB as well. So the second case I'm looking at now has become very familiar to many of us, which is the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a proactive foreign policy agenda, very ambitious, of course, advocated by the Chinese leadership, which also include very ambitious proposals to build a quote-unquote Silk Road economic belt extending through Central Asia, and a new quote-unquote maritime Silk Road with ASEAN countries, and which are summarized firstly as One Belt and One Road, now formally as Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI in short. The mission of Belt and Road Initiative are as follows: aim at boosting exports, of course, also increase, most importantly, increase the connectivities in the region and beyond, and also enhancing access to natural resources, and lastly, also to integrate China's neighbors and the Asian region, European regions more closely with the Chinese economy. The BRI is an upgraded version of China's reform and opening up policy, and the largest ever global, in a way, as the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang calls it, largest ever global public goods that China has to offer to the world in an effort to resolve the global challenges. Chinese President Xi Jinping has explicitly invited the world to board China's train of development. I think this concept of free riding has come up during our 2 days discussion. But President Xi basically saying we welcome the rest of the world to free ride on this express train of China. This is actually what he say. Welcome aboard China's train of development. You can take a ride on our express train or just make a hitchhike. All are welcome. So everyone is welcome on board. And there are 5 priorities of the BRI. It's called Wutong in Chinese, or connectivities in 5 areas, namely policy coordinations, facilities connectivities, trade facilitation, financial integration, and people-to-people exchange. So these 5 connectivities or connectivities in 5 areas are the key goal tasks of the BRI. Now China leverages actually on its comparative advantage in infrastructure development, including, for instance, high-speed rail. By the end of last year, China has built 20,000 kilometers, which account 65% of world's total mileage of high-speed rails. And also, hydraulic electro-generating capacity. China also ranked #1 with 290 billion watt of capacity. And they also, China building some of the largest bridges, ports, highways, etc. It is estimated that by 2020, BRI project will have benefit 63% of world population and generate 2.1 trillion world GDP in US dollar amount. And BRI can help generate robust economic growth by developing infrastructure. And this chart actually shows the estimated macroeconomic benefits of Asia-wide connectivities measured in the areas of transportation, communications, and energy. And it shows very clearly how BRI can help really create a robust economic growth in Asia. And China held the very successful, the first Belt and Road Summit back in May this year, and 28 government leaders, state government leaders attended the summit. And the third next case I'm looking at is the story of Alibaba. Many people have heard about it. China now has the largest number of internet users in the world, with estimated 700 million internet users. And China's total online transaction last year is more than 37.1 trillion in Chinese currency, RMB amount. But this is enormous, which is actually 50 times of that of the United States and more than Japan's annual GDP. And according to the Accenture and Ali research data, the global business to customer B2C cross-border e-commerce market will reach $1 trillion by 2020, and China will become the world's largest B2C market. And Alibaba, as China's outstanding internet company, one of the most successful in the world actually, is shaping the process of globalization and becoming a model of innovator of global institutions. And let me just quickly share some of the data. And this is a data shows that China's cross-border e-commerce import-export growth between 2010 and 2016. You can see that it's a dramatic increase. And also, this is average number of online orders per capita per year. And China it's the largest amount of online orders worldwide. And Jack Ma, chairman of Alibaba, he said something very interesting. He said, I hope 15 years later, people will simply forget about e-commerce, because They just think it's just like electricity. It's become so natural. People forget about it. We have to like go online and start do shopping. It's just like electricity. It's just part of our life. It's become so integrated into our everyday life. And in November 11th last year, Alibaba launched this so-called Double 11 Global Online Shopping Carnival. The November 11th because, you know, 1 and 1, which means it's a festival for singles. You have nothing else to do but go online shopping. So they very interestingly, sort of how the 2 minutes, 1 minute, 2 minutes. Okay, I will very quickly wrap up. So they create this huge online shopping carnival, and the number trading volume now is quickly over 120 billion RMB, and that actually way outweighed the number of the so-called Black Friday 3-day trading volume in the United States. So they're celebrating setting the world record, you know, one single day trade volume. And Alibaba and also Alibaba leftover treasures has exceeded the size of JP Morgan Chase and become the world's largest money market funds with 165 billion US dollars as of March this year. And Jack Ma aims to create a cross-border, cross-time, cross-space economic community which has never been seen in human history. So I have to very quickly go through some of the slides. So Alibaba also proposed to build the World Electronic Trade Platform Initiative, which will account for 80% of the world's small and medium enterprises. This picture shows the initiative by Jack Ma. And then he proposed that at the Boao Forum in March last year. And last year, Jack Ma's EWTP proposal was adopted in the communique of a G20 Hangzhou Summit. In March this year, Alibaba also launched Jack Ma, and with Malaysian Prime Minister Najib announced the first EWTP pilot area established in Malaysia. So they're basically building what we can, you know, they call online Silk Road. And this is data shows e-commerce connectivity index rank of all the Belt and Road countries. And AliExpress is the biggest regional cross-border exports B2C retail platform. Actually, now goes global, and more than 100 million overseas customers from 220 countries and regions around the world interact very actively. And the BRI country users have accounted for about 45% of all users. And this is the number of overseas buyers on AliExpress. And next 10 to 15 years, Alibaba aims to serve 2 billion global customers, help 10 billion small business, 1 million small business from all around the world, and make profits and create 100 million jobs globally. And that's why I think Mr. Trump, actually, he warmly welcomed Jack Ma not a while ago in the United States when Jack Ma promised to invest and create jobs for the United States. Now, finally, concluding. So what the regularization truly implies? First, I think regularization helped to, very important, to restore the legitimacy of globalization. Because nowadays, globalization in particularly many Western countries, become a very bad, negative word. You know, people tend to refrain from talking about that. But I think regularization helps to restore the legitimacy of globalization. Secondly, regularization helps to bring back certainty when global uncertainty is on the rise. And this is so important. And I think, and in fact, I think President Xi also, in many of his speeches, also emphasized this point. And third, regularization is about capacity expansion of the existing global order. It will provide, I argue, a more coherent and optimistic script of the evolution of global order. The world is not fragmenting. It's not is on fire or sleeping in the chaos or trapped in successive traps, rising power, existing powers engaged in the struggle of power. No, it's actually into there is a more coherent, optimistic script about the evolution of global order. So we are arguing that there is something fundamental that holds the world together. And this is something I call it reglobalization. Fourth and lastly, when China meets the world again, so China is no longer the China we know, and the world is bound to be changed, reshaped, and remodeled significantly. So welcome to the age of reglobalization. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you.